Welcome to today's episode of Human Odyssey. Picture this. A small band of our ancestors stands at the edge of what we now call the Red Sea. Behind them stretches the familiar savanna of Africa, the only home our species has ever known for 200,000 years. Ahead lies an alien world of endless horizons, scorching deserts that could kill in days, frozen wastelands where temperatures plummet to -40 degrees, and vast oceans with no visible end. These weren't explorers with maps, GPS, or survival gear. They carried only stone tools, animal skins, and something far more powerful, an unbreakable human spirit that refused to accept limits. What drove them to leave everything behind and venture into environments that should have been their tomb? How did a species that evolved in tropical Africa not only survive but thrive in the Arctic tundra, cross 55-mile stretches of open ocean without compasses, and turn the world's largest desert into a highway? The answer lies in the most remarkable survival story ever told. Between 100,000 and 15,000 years ago, small groups of humans accomplished what no other species had ever managed. They conquered every environment on Earth. This is the story of how your ancestors became the ultimate survivors, masters of fire and ice, desert and sea. It's a tale of innovation born from desperation, of courage that defied death, and of the incredible journey that transformed a small population of African primates into the dominant force on planet Earth. Chapter 1. The Great Departure. The East African Rift Valley stretches like a massive scar across the continent, its ancient lakes glimmering under the relentless sun. Here, 200,000 years ago, the first anatomically modern humans, our direct ancestors, took their first steps. But for millennia, they remained trapped in their African homeland, held back by an almost insurmountable barrier, the Sahara Desert. Today, we see the Sahara as Earth's largest hot desert, a 3.5 million square mile wasteland where daytime temperatures soar above 130 degrees Fahrenheit and water is as precious as gold. But 120,000 years ago, this desert was dying. Climate patterns driven by the Earth's orbital cycles had transformed the hellish wasteland into something extraordinary, a green corridor teeming with life. Rivers flowed where sand dunes now tower. Lake systems stretched for hundreds of miles, their shores lined with acacia trees and grasslands. Hippos wallowed in waters that haven't existed for 100,000 years, while antelopes grazed on meadows now buried under endless sand. Scientists analyzing ancient pollen grains trapped in Mediterranean sea sediments have revealed the stunning truth. The Sahara had become a superhighway of vegetation connecting sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean coast. The transformation was breathtaking in scope. Where modern satellite images show nothing but endless dunes, ancient Africa supported rivers comparable to the modern Nile. The Western Sahara corridor alone carried more water annually than the Colorado River system. Lake Chad expanded to become an inland sea larger than the Caspian, its shores supporting forests of fever trees and riverine woodlands where elephants, giraffes, and rhinoceros browsed in comfort. These weren't marginal improvements in habitability. They were complete ecosystem transformations. Pollen analysis from deep-sea cores reveals that during peak green periods, tropical vegetation extended nearly 500 miles further north than today. The Sahel region expanded into what is now central Algeria, while Mediterranean vegetation patterns reached deep into the Libyan desert. For our ancestors watching these changes unfold over generations, the barrier that had confined them to sub-Saharan Africa was literally dissolving before their eyes. Our ancestors were ready. Archaeological evidence from sites like Pinnacle Point in South Africa shows that by 164,000 years ago, early humans had developed sophisticated behaviors that would prove crucial for survival in new environments. They were harvesting shellfish from dangerous coastlines, the world's first systematic exploitation of marine resources. They had mastered the production of complex stone tools, creating razor-sharp blades that could process plants, meat, and materials with surgical precision. Perhaps most remarkably, they were using red ochre pigments, suggesting symbolic behavior and the cognitive abilities needed for complex communication. The technology they possessed was revolutionary for its time. Stone tool assemblages from this period show evidence of planned tool production. Raw materials were selected and transported over long distances, then processed using techniques that required years of training to master. These weren't simple choppers and scrapers, but sophisticated implements designed for specific tasks. Hafted spear points for hunting, hide scrapers for processing skins, and precision blades for plant processing. But perhaps most crucial was their mastery of fire. Archaeological evidence shows systematic fire use dating back at least 400,000 years. But by 150,000 years ago, African humans had achieved something unprecedented: controlled landscape burning. They weren't just using fire for cooking and warmth. They were using it as an environmental management tool, creating favorable conditions for preferred plant and animal species while clearing underbrush that harbored dangerous predators and disease vectors. The cognitive abilities underlying these technologies were even more remarkable. Brain size in early modern humans had reached essentially modern levels, but more importantly, they had developed what researchers call executive cognitive functions: the ability to plan complex activities, coordinate group efforts, and think abstractly about future possibilities. These mental capabilities would prove essential for navigating the challenges ahead. But it was climate change that provided the final push. Heinrich events, massive releases of icebergs into the North Atlantic, triggered cascading climate shifts across Africa. These events, occurring roughly every 20,000 years, caused dramatic changes in rainfall patterns. As conditions became increasingly arid in much of East and West Africa, our ancestors faced a stark choice: adapt to shrinking resources or seek new lands. The Heinrich events created what climatologists call climate refugia, small areas where favorable conditions persisted while surrounding regions became uninhabitable. Archaeological sites from this period show evidence of population concentration in these refugia, creating the demographic pressure that would eventually drive expansion northward. Competition for resources intensified as populations were forced into smaller areas, while the visible evidence of green corridors opening to the north provided both opportunity and incentive for migration. The Exodus began around 100,000 years ago, not as a single great migration, but as a series of waves, each taking advantage of brief windows when the climate aligned in their favor. Computer models developed by researchers at the University of Hawaii reveal that these windows opened approximately every 20,000 years when orbital cycles brought increased rainfall to North Africa. During these green periods, rivers flowed from the volcanic Tibesti Mountains in central Sahara all the way to the Mediterranean, creating an unbroken corridor of fresh water and vegetation. The first groups to attempt the northward journey were likely following animal migrations. Large mammals had made seasonal migrations between sub-Saharan and North Africa for millions of years, and early humans were expert trackers who understood animal behavior patterns. As climate conditions improved, animal populations began extending their ranges northward, and human hunting parties followed them, gradually pushing the boundaries of human occupation into previously uninhabitable regions. Groups of perhaps 20 to 50 individuals began the journey northward, following herds of animals along river valleys that no longer exist. They carried with them a toolkit that would prove invaluable: knowledge of fire, techniques for processing plant foods, and most importantly, the ability to work together. These were desperate refugees fleeing disaster. They were the advance guard of the most successful colonization in Earth's history. The social organization required for these migrations was unprecedented in human history. Unlike previous human expansions, which had occurred gradually over hundreds of thousands of years, The crossing of the Sahara required coordinated group efforts involving precise timing, resource management, and risk assessment. Leadership structures emerged to coordinate these activities, while information networks developed to share knowledge about routes, water sources, and seasonal conditions. Communication technologies became crucial for success. The use of symbolic markers, rock art, carved objects, and ritual deposits shows evidence of information, storage, and transmission systems that allowed successful routes and techniques to be shared across groups and generations. These weren't just artistic expressions, but functional communication technologies that preserved vital survival information. The material culture of early migrants shows remarkable innovation and adaptation. Tool assemblages become increasingly diverse and specialized, suggesting rapid technological development driven by new environmental challenges. Projectile point designs show regional variations that reflect adaptation to different prey species encountered during the migration. Container technologies, bags, baskets, and water carriers appear for the first time in the archaeological record, indicating the development of portable storage systems essential for long-distance travel. Genetic evidence suggests that fewer than 1,000 individuals made the successful crossing out of Africa during this period. Their descendants would eventually populate every continent except Antarctica, but the journey had only just begun. The Green Sahara was a gift from climate, but it wouldn't last forever. As orbital patterns shifted and rainfall decreased, our ancestors found themselves committed to a one-way journey into the unknown. The genetic bottleneck created by this small founding population had profound implications for human evolution. The groups that successfully crossed the Sahara carried only a subset of African genetic diversity, but they also carried the cognitive and cultural innovations that had made the crossing possible. Natural selection during this period favored traits associated with innovation, cooperation, and environmental adaptability, characteristics that would define human expansion for the next 100,000 years. By 80,000 years ago, the first archaeological evidence of modern humans appears outside Africa's stone tools and fossil remains in the caves of Kafsa and Skul in what is now Israel. These sites tell a story of successful adaptation. Humans had crossed the Sahara, navigated the Sinai Peninsula, and established themselves in the Levant. They had taken the first crucial step toward becoming a global species. The Levantine sites reveal remarkable continuity with African technologies, suggesting that the successful migrants had maintained their cultural traditions while adapting to new environments. Stone tool technologies show clear African origins, but with modifications that reflect local raw materials and environmental conditions. Evidence of symbolic behavior continues, with shell beads and ochre use indicating that the cognitive abilities that had enabled the African expansion were being applied to new challenges. But this was only the beginning. The relatively mild conditions of the Eastern Mediterranean would soon give way to challenges that would test human ingenuity to its absolute limits. Ahead lay frozen wastelands where winter temperatures could kill in hours, desert expanses that dwarfed even the Sahara, and ocean crossings that would demand technologies that wouldn't be invented for thousands of years. The great departure from Africa was complete, but the true test of human survival had only just begun. The success of the African exodus had proven that human cognitive abilities could overcome environmental barriers that had confined other species for millions of years. But it had also committed humanity to a path of constant adaptation and innovation. There could be no going back. The climate windows that had enabled the crossing would soon close, leaving the migrants isolated in Eurasia with no choice but to continue their expansion into increasingly challenging environments. The great human adventure had begun, and there would be no turning back. Chapter 2: Masters of Fire and Ice. By 45,000 years ago, human footprints were leaving their mark across the frozen wilderness of northern Eurasia. The world was in the grip of the last ice age, and vast ice sheets stretched from Scandinavia to the Ural Mountains. Winter temperatures regularly plummeted to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, a cold so extreme it can freeze exposed skin in minutes. For most species, these lands were utterly uninhabitable. But humans were about to prove they were anything but typical. The archaeological site of Yana, located at 71 degrees north latitude in Siberia, while above the Arctic Circle, tells one of the most remarkable survival stories in human history. Here, 30,000 years ago, during one of the coldest periods of the Ice Age, sophisticated human societies were not merely surviving but thriving in conditions that would challenge modern Arctic explorers equipped with advanced technology. The landscape these pioneers encountered was unlike anything that exists today. The Mammoth Steppe, as paleontologists call it, stretched from the Atlantic coast of Europe to the Pacific shores of Asia, a continent-sized grassland that supported the most spectacular concentration of large mammals in Earth's history. Herds of woolly mammoths thundered across frozen plains in numbers that defied imagination, their ranks stretching to the horizon. Woolly rhinoceros, their horns spanning 6 feet, grazed alongside giant bison whose shoulders stood 7 feet high. Cave lions the size of modern tigers stalked through this frozen paradise, while short-faced bears, standing 12 feet tall on their hind legs, dominated the predator hierarchy. Into this alien world stepped our ancestors, armed with nothing but stone tools, fire, and an indomitable will to survive. The challenges they faced were staggering. Temperatures routinely dropped to levels where exposed skin would freeze solid in minutes. Blizzards with hurricane-force winds could last for days, creating whiteout conditions that made navigation impossible. For 6 months of the year, the sun never rose above the horizon, leaving the landscape in perpetual twilight broken only by the dancing colors of the aurora borealis. Yet the evidence uncovered from Yana paints a picture of incredible adaptation. Stone tools of extraordinary sophistication litter the site, not crude implements hastily made for basic survival, but carefully crafted instruments designed for specific tasks. Scrapers perfectly shaped for processing animal hides, burins for carving bone and ivory, and projectile points designed for hunting in Arctic conditions. The level of craftsmanship rivals that of modern artisans, with some tools showing evidence of reworking and resharpening that indicates they were treasured possessions maintained over years of use. But perhaps most remarkable of all is a delicate awl made from a woolly rhinoceros horn, a sewing implement that reveals the secret of human Arctic survival. This tiny tool, no larger than a pencil, represents one of the most important technological breakthroughs in human history. Its eye is so small and precisely formed that creating it would challenge modern craftspeople using power tools. Yet 30,000 years ago, Arctic dwellers were producing these instruments with nothing but stone tools and infinite patience. The discovery of this needle-like implement reveals the true secret of human Arctic survival. Clothing had become humanity's second skin. The crude animal hides used by earlier humans would have been death sentences in Arctic conditions. But by 30,000 years ago, humans had developed what anthropologist Brian Fagan calls the most important invention in human history: the eye needle. These tiny implements, carved from bone and ivory, with eyes so small they required incredible skill to create, revolutionized human survival capabilities. Archaeological evidence from permafrost sites across Siberia reveals clothing systems that were marvels of prehistoric engineering. Just like modern mountaineering gear, Arctic clothing consisted of multiple layers designed for different purposes. The inner layer, made from soft bird feathers or the finest animal fur, wicking moisture away from the skin while providing essential insulation. These base layers were often made from ptarmigan feathers, thousands of tiny down feathers painstakingly collected and sewn into lightweight but incredibly warm garments. Over this came insulating layers of thick reindeer hide, carefully tailored to fit the body while allowing freedom of movement. Reindeer fur is uniquely adapted to Arctic conditions. Each hair is hollow, creating microscopic air pockets that provide exceptional insulation while remaining lightweight. The hides were processed using sophisticated tanning techniques that kept them supple even at extreme temperatures, preventing the cracking and stiffening that would make movement impossible. The outer layer provided wind and water protection, often made from the naturally waterproof skin of seals or the tough hide of mammoths. These outer garments were engineered to shed wind and moisture while allowing water vapor from perspiration to escape, a principle that modern outdoor clothing manufacturers have only recently perfected. Seams were sealed with animal sinews and waterproofed with rendered fat, creating garments that could withstand the most extreme weather conditions. Each garment was a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering that required weeks or months to create. Seamstresses and the archaeological evidence suggests this was primarily women's work, used wild flax and plant fibers to create thread, supplemented with sinews from hunted animals. They had even developed dyes from berries and plants, creating clothing in colors like turquoise and pink that provided both practical camouflage and psychological benefits in the monochrome Arctic landscape. Boot construction reached extraordinary levels of sophistication. Arctic footwear consisted of multiple components: waterproof outer shells made from seal or walrus hide, insulating middle layers of fur or processed grass, and soft inner linings that could be removed for drying. Some boots incorporated removable insoles, made from specially prepared materials that provided additional insulation and could be replaced when worn out. The sole construction used layered materials that provided both insulation from the ground and traction on ice, with some examples showing carved tread patterns that wouldn't look out of place on modern winter boots. Gloves were designed with separate fingers for dexterity crucial for tool use and fire maintenance, while mittens could be worn over them for maximum warmth during travel. Hoods were adjustable, with drawstrings made from sinew that could seal openings against wind while maintaining visibility. Some garments incorporated ventilation systems that could be opened or closed depending on activity level, preventing dangerous overheating during strenuous work followed by rapid cooling. But clothing was just one element of Arctic survival. The humans of Yana had solved a fuel crisis that should have killed them. Wood was virtually non-existent in the Arctic tundra, but they had discovered an alternative: mammoth bone. Archaeological evidence shows systematic mammoth hunting, not primarily for meat, but for raw materials. Mammoth ivory was carved into tools, utensils, and weapon components. Most crucially, mammoth bones burned hot and long, providing the BTS needed to survive Arctic winters. The science behind bone fuel is remarkable. Mammoth bones contain high levels of fat and marrow that made them extremely effective fuel sources. A single mammoth femur could burn for hours, providing more heat energy than many types of wood. The high calcium content created a clean burn with minimal smoke, essential for enclosed shelters where ventilation was limited. Different bones were selected for different purposes: long bones for extended heating, flat bones for quick cooking fires, and skull fragments for emergency fuel that could be ignited quickly. Storage and processing of bone fuel required sophisticated planning. Archaeological evidence shows organized stockpiles of bones sorted by type and burning characteristics. Bones were broken into optimal sizes for efficient burning while maintaining the structural integrity needed for effective combustion. Some bones were processed to remove marrow for food use, while preserving the bone matrix for fuel, maximizing the utility of each mammoth carcass. Fire management in Arctic conditions demanded skills that modern people can barely comprehend. Starting fires at -40 degrees required techniques and materials specifically adapted to extreme cold. Tinder had to remain dry and combustible despite constant moisture from breath and perspiration. Firestarter materials included specially prepared punk wood, dried fungi, and rendered animal fats that could ignite even when wet. Flint and steel techniques were refined to produce sparks capable of igniting tinder in high winds and extreme cold. Shelter construction in the Arctic reached levels of sophistication that wouldn't be seen again for millennia. These weren't the simple lean-tos of warmer climates, but complex structures designed for months of continuous habitation. Construction began with excavation into the permafrost, creating a foundation that provided insulation from the ground and protection from wind. The physical effort required was enormous. Cutting through frozen ground with stone tools demanded tremendous labor and cooperation. The framework consisted of mammoth bones, femurs, and ribs carefully selected for their structural properties and fitted together like the skeleton of a building. These bone frameworks were incredibly strong, capable of supporting heavy loads of insulating materials, while remaining flexible enough to handle the expansion and contraction caused by extreme temperature variations. The engineering principles involved load distribution, stress management, and thermal expansion were sophisticated enough to impress modern architects. Over the bone framework went multiple layers of insulating materials. First came thick sod cut from the brief summer tundra, its root system still intact to provide structural strength. This was carefully positioned to provide maximum insulation while allowing for drainage of moisture. Next came animal hides, often multiple layers of different materials, each contributing specific properties to the overall shelter system. Mammoth hides provided structural strength and weather resistance, while reindeer hides added insulation. Smaller animal skins were used to seal gaps and provide additional layers where needed. The interior design of these Arctic homes was equally sophisticated. Carefully constructed hearths provided heat, light, and cooking facilities while minimizing smoke and maximizing heat distribution. Stone-lined fire pits were positioned to create convection currents that distributed warm air throughout the shelter, while carefully designed ventilation systems prevented deadly carbon monoxide buildup while retaining precious heat. Smoke holes were positioned and sized to create proper draft while minimizing heat loss. Sleeping areas were elevated above the main floor to take advantage of rising warm air, while storage areas were positioned according to temperature zones within the shelter. Frozen storage pits dug into the permafrost could preserve meat for months, while elevated platforms kept essential items away from moisture and vermin. The spatial organization reflected deep understanding of thermodynamics, air circulation, and human comfort requirements. Interior furnishing included sophisticated bedding systems designed for Arctic conditions. Sleeping platforms were constructed from materials that provided insulation from the ground while allowing air circulation. Bedding consisted of multiple layers-based mats made from woven grasses or small animal furs, insulating layers of larger furs and covering layers that could be adjusted according to temperature. Some beds incorporated heated stone systems where rocks were heated in the fire and placed in special compartments to provide radiant warmth through the night. The hunting technologies developed for Arctic conditions were revolutionary. Traditional spear throwing techniques proved inadequate for penetrating the thick winter coats of Arctic animals, leading to the development of spear throwers that provided the velocity needed to pierce mammoth hide. These atlatls, as archaeologists call them, were engineering marvels that multiplied throwing force while maintaining accuracy at distances up to 100 yards. Projectile points designed for Arctic hunting were larger and more robust than their temperate climate counterparts. They had to penetrate not just skin and flesh but thick layers of fur and fat that could stop conventional weapons. The points were carefully hafted to shafts using techniques that ensured they would remain attached even during violent encounters with massive prey animals. Some points show evidence of poison use plant and animal toxins that would incapacitate large prey, even if the initial wound wasn't immediately fatal. Hunting strategies evolved to match the unprecedented scale of Arctic prey. Mammoth hunting required coordinated efforts involving entire communities. Archaeological evidence from kill sites shows sophisticated planning and execution. Hunting parties would track mammoth herds for days, waiting for optimal conditions, animals separated from the main herd, favorable wind conditions, and terrain that could be used to advantage. The actual hunting process involved elaborate strategies that maximize success while minimizing risk. Multiple hunting parties would coordinate to drive mammoths toward prepared locations where the geography provided advantages: cliff edges, boggy ground, or narrow passes where the animal's mobility was restricted. Spear points were aimed at specific vulnerable areas identified through generations of experience spots where arteries could be severed or organs damaged to bring down animals weighing up to 6 tons. But perhaps the greatest achievement of these Arctic pioneers was psychological. The Arctic isn't just physically challenging, it's mentally devastating. The isolation, monotonous landscape, and extreme conditions create psychological pressures that break many modern explorers despite extensive preparation and support systems. Seasonal affective disorder, cabin fever, and depression are constant threats in environments where the sun doesn't shine for months and social interaction is limited to small groups confined in cramped shelters. Yet archaeological evidence from sites across Arctic Eurasia shows not just survival but cultural flourishing. Art objects carved from mammoth ivory demonstrate aesthetic sensibilities and creative expression that went far beyond basic survival needs. These weren't crude scratchings, but sophisticated sculptures that required artistic vision and technical skill. Figurines of animals and humans show attention to detail and artistic style that rivals modern craftsmanship. Musical instruments made from bone and ivory indicate that these communities maintained cultural traditions that provided psychological support and social cohesion. Flutes, drums, and other instruments required significant time and skill to create, suggesting that music played an important role in Arctic life. Archaeological evidence of dance floors and gathering areas indicates that communal activities provided essential social interaction during the long winter months. The development of storytelling traditions, while not directly preserved in the archaeological record, can be inferred from the complexity of tool traditions and hunting techniques that required precise transmission across generations. The knowledge needed to survive in the Arctic animal behavior patterns, weather prediction, tool manufacturing techniques, and hunting strategies was too complex to be maintained without sophisticated information storage and transmission systems. Trade networks spanning thousands of miles connected Arctic communities across the entire Eurasian landmass. Raw materials appear hundreds of miles from their sources: Baltic amber in Siberian sites, obsidian from volcanic regions in areas with no volcanic activity, and specialized tool materials that indicate exchange relationships across vast distances. These networks weren't just economic but social, providing the genetic diversity and cultural exchange necessary for long-term survival in isolated environments. The social structures that supported these trade networks required sophisticated diplomatic and organizational abilities. Different groups had to develop systems for peaceful interaction, resource sharing, and conflict resolution that could function across language and cultural barriers. The archaeological evidence suggests that these systems were remarkably successful, with little evidence of warfare or violent conflict among Arctic communities. Population genetics reveals another remarkable aspect of Arctic adaptation. The founding populations that colonized these extreme environments were small, probably numbering in the hundreds rather than thousands. Yet they maintained genetic diversity and avoided the inbreeding that typically destroys small populations. This suggests sophisticated mating systems and social structures that actively promoted genetic health across generations. These lords of the frozen realm had solved every challenge the Ice Age could present. They had transformed clothing from simple protection into sophisticated environmental control systems. They had turned shelter construction into an engineering discipline. They had developed hunting technologies that could bring down the largest land animals that ever lived. Most remarkably, they had created social and cultural systems that not only enabled survival in the world's most challenging environments, but actually promoted human flourishing. The genetic legacy of these Arctic pioneers can still be detected in modern populations. DNA analysis reveals that the cognitive abilities, physical adaptations, and behavioral traits that enabled Ice Age survival remain present in human populations worldwide. The same problem-solving abilities that enabled mammoth hunting now power modern innovation. The same cooperative instincts that made Arctic survival possible now coordinate global enterprises. The same determination that refused to accept environmental limits now drives space exploration and technological advancement. But the greatest achievement of these Arctic masters was proving that human adaptability had no limits. They had taken a species evolved for tropical conditions and made it capable of thriving in environments that challenged the survival of animals specifically adapted to cold conditions. They had demonstrated that human ingenuity, cooperation, and determination could overcome any obstacle that nature could present. As the Ice Age began its slow retreat and new challenges emerged, the descendants of these Arctic pioneers carried with them the ultimate survival toolkit. Not just the material technologies they had developed, but the cognitive abilities and social systems that had made those technologies possible. They had become the ultimate survivors, ready for whatever impossible challenges lay ahead. The mastery of fire and ice had prepared them for their next great adventure, conquering the vast oceans that separated continents and the unknown lands that lay beyond the horizon. Chapter 3. Crossing the Ocean of Sand. The Sahara Desert today is Earth's most formidable natural barrier, a 3,500-mile wall of sand, rock, and scorching heat that separates sub-Saharan Africa from the Mediterranean world. Surface temperatures regularly exceed 130 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to cook an egg on a rock. Water sources are separated by hundreds of miles, and sandstorms can strip flesh from bone. Yet 70,000 years ago, small bands of humans were crossing this hellscape not once, but repeatedly, turning what should have been an impenetrable barrier into a highway for human expansion. The secret lay in timing and an intimate understanding of climate patterns that modern meteorologists are only beginning to appreciate. Every 20,000 years, subtle changes in Earth's orbit triggered massive shifts in the African monsoon system. During these brief windows lasting perhaps a few thousand years, the Sahara transformed from a burning wasteland into something approaching paradise. Archaeological evidence from deep drilling projects in the Mediterranean reveals the stunning extent of these transformations. Analysis of ancient pollen grains and marine sediments shows that during humid periods, the Sahara supported vast river systems flowing north toward the Mediterranean. 3 major river networks, comparable to the modern Nile, carved channels through what is now empty desert. Their watersheds supported grasslands stretching for thousands of square miles, dotted with permanent lakes that teemed with fish, crocodiles, and hippos. The scale of these ancient river systems defied modern comprehension. The Western Saharan River Network alone drained a watershed larger than the Mississippi Basin, carrying seasonal floods that could dwarf the Amazon at peak flow. Lake Mega Chad expanded during these periods to cover an area larger than the Caspian Sea, its shores supporting gallery forests where elephants, giraffes, and rhinoceros browsed alongside species that exist nowhere today. Paleoclimate reconstructions revealed that during peak humid periods, rainfall in the Central Sahara exceeded 20 inches annually, more than many modern temperate regions receive. The transformation wasn't gradual, but could occur within human lifetimes, as orbital forcing triggered rapid reorganization of atmospheric circulation patterns. Generations that had known only desert could witness the emergence of rivers, lakes, and forests where their grandparents had seen only sand. But these green corridors were temporary gifts from climate, and our ancestors had to time their crossings with extraordinary precision. Computer climate models developed by researchers at the University of Bristol revealed the narrow windows of opportunity. Rivers flowed for only 3 months each year, even during the wettest periods. Miss this window, and travelers would face a year-long wait, assuming they could survive in an environment that remained marginal at best. The humans attempting these crossings had evolved sophisticated technologies for desert survival that wouldn't look out of place in a modern survival manual. Water procurement and storage had become matters of life and death, driving innovations that required both technical skill and deep environmental knowledge. They had learned to read the landscape for signs of hidden water, the subtle differences in vegetation that indicated underground springs, the rock formations that might hold precious rainwater, the behavior of animals that might lead to water sources invisible to human eyes. Desert water procurement required skills that bordered on the mystical. Experienced desert travelers could identify seasonal seeps from the pattern of mineral deposits on rocks, locate underground streams from the flight patterns of insects, and predict the depth of water tables from the root systems of desert plants. They developed techniques for extracting moisture from seemingly dry soil, creating condensation traps that could collect precious drops of water from nighttime temperature differences. Water storage technology represented one of humanity's first major engineering challenges. Traditional containers made from animal skins had to be specially treated to prevent water loss through evaporation while remaining flexible enough for transport. Stomach bags from large animals were processed using techniques that created nearly waterproof containers, capable of holding several gallons. These containers required careful maintenance, regular cleaning, rehydration of the skin, and repair of inevitable leaks that could mean the difference between life and death. More sophisticated storage systems included buried caches, underground reservoirs, lined with specially prepared materials that could preserve water for months or even years. These installations required careful site selection, sophisticated understanding of soil chemistry, and construction techniques that prevented contamination while maintaining accessibility. Archaeological evidence shows that successful desert crossers established networks of these water caches along proven routes, creating supply chains that enabled repeated crossings. Clothing systems designed for desert conditions were as sophisticated as their Arctic counterparts, but served opposite functions. Loose-fitting garments made from light-colored materials reflected heat rather than retaining it, while their design created convection currents that provided cooling through evaporation. The fabrics themselves represented technological achievements, plant fibers, processed to create breathable but protective materials that could withstand constant exposure to sun, sand, and extreme temperature variations. Desert clothing incorporated multiple layers for different conditions. Base layers made from soft plant fibers provided comfort while wicking moisture away from the skin. Middle layers offered protection from sun and wind while allowing air circulation. Outer garments could be configured for different weather conditions, sealed against sandstorms or opened for maximum cooling during travel. Head coverings were particularly sophisticated, providing protection for eyes, nose, and mouth while maintaining visibility and breathing comfort. The engineering of desert footwear represented perhaps the greatest challenge of all. Feet had to be protected from sand that could reach temperatures of 160 degrees Fahrenheit while maintaining the flexibility needed for travel over uneven terrain. Desert boots incorporated multiple sole layers, outer soles that provided insulation from hot surfaces, middle layers that offered padding and support, and inner layers that could be removed for cleaning and drying. Some designs included ventilation systems that provided cooling while preventing sand infiltration. Navigation across featureless terrain required skills that modern GPS users can barely imagine. Desert travelers learned to read star patterns with astronomical precision, using celestial markers invisible to untrained eyes. They could determine direction from the subtle patterns of sand dune formation, the microscopic differences in rock weathering, even the flight patterns of birds heading to distant water sources. Landmarks that meant nothing to outsiders became vital navigation beacons. Specific rock formations, unusual geological features, or ancient trees that had survived multiple climate cycles. The navigation techniques developed for desert crossing were remarkably sophisticated. Travelers learned to use the sun's position throughout the day, accounting for seasonal variations and the changing angles that occurred as they moved north or south. Star navigation required memorization of dozens of celestial markers and their seasonal movements. Wind patterns provided additional directional information, as experienced travelers could determine their bearing from the consistent patterns of sand movement and the distinctive sounds that different winds made across various terrain features. Dead reckoning techniques allowed desert travelers to maintain course even during sandstorms when all visual references disappeared. These methods required precise estimation of travel speed, careful tracking of time, and the ability to account for course corrections forced by terrain obstacles. Some evidence suggests that desert travelers use crude but effective distance measurement techniques, counting steps over known distances to calibrate their pace, then maintain consistent rhythm during long-distance travel. Perhaps most crucially, desert crossing required social technologies as sophisticated as any material innovation. These weren't solo adventures, but carefully coordinated group efforts involving precise timing, resource sharing, and extraordinary levels of trust. Groups had to be large enough to share the burden of carrying water and supplies, but small enough to avoid depleting scarce resources along the route. The optimal group size, typically 15 to 25 individuals, represented a complex calculation involving resource requirements, risk distribution, and social dynamics. Leadership structures had to balance individual expertise with group decision-making. Desert crossing success often depended on the knowledge and experience of individual specialists, navigation experts, water finders, weather predictors, but group survival required democratic decision-making processes that could function under extreme stress. Conflict resolution became a matter of group survival, as interpersonal disputes could destroy the cooperation essential for success. Resource management during desert crossings required mathematical precision that challenged the cognitive abilities of early humans. Water consumption had to be carefully calculated based on group size, travel distance, weather conditions, and contingency requirements. Food supplies had to provide adequate nutrition while minimizing weight and bulk. Equipment selection involved complex trade-offs between utility and portability, with every item subjected to rigorous cost-benefit analysis. The logistics of desert crossing demanded unprecedented planning and preparation. Route selection required detailed knowledge of seasonal conditions, water availability, and terrain challenges that might not be encountered for hundreds of miles. Weather prediction became crucial for timing departures and anticipating dangerous conditions. Supply catching required advanced expeditions to establish resource depots along planned routes. Emergency preparedness reached sophisticated levels as desert travelers developed contingency plans for every conceivable disaster. Sandstorm survival required specific techniques and equipment that could mean the difference between life and death. Methods for treating heat exhaustion, dehydration, and other desert-related medical emergencies were developed and refined through hard experience. Search and rescue protocols helped groups recover separated members and locate lost equipment. The evidence for successful desert mastery appears in archaeological sites scattered across the Sahara's current wasteland. At Columnation 4 in the Nefa Desert, stone tools dating to 55,000 years ago lie scattered around the shores of ancient lakes. These aren't crude emergency implements, but sophisticated tool assemblages, indicating established human presence during favorable climate periods. The tools show clear evidence of maintenance and resharpening, suggesting extended occupation rather than brief emergency stops. Similar sites dot the current desert landscape from Morocco to Sudan, each one representing a way station on the Great Human Crossing. The distribution of these sites reveals the routes taken by ancient travelers' corridors that connected water sources and followed the most favorable terrain. Some sites show evidence of repeated occupation over thousands of years, indicating that successful routes became traditional pathways used by multiple generations of desert crossers. The material culture found at these sites reveals remarkable adaptation to desert conditions. Tool assemblages include specialized implements for desert survival, water procurement equipment, specialized hunting gear for desert prey, and portable technologies designed for maximum utility with minimal weight. The presence of exotic materials, stones, and minerals from sources hundreds of miles away indicates that successful desert crossers maintained trade networks that span the entire width of the Sahara. But the most remarkable discovery comes from genetic analysis of modern populations. DNA evidence reveals that the successful crossing of the Sahara was accomplished by fewer than 500 individuals, whose descendants would eventually populate all of Eurasia and beyond. This tiny founding population carried with them not just their genes, but their accumulated knowledge of survival in impossible conditions. The genetic bottleneck created by desert crossing had profound evolutionary implications. Natural selection during these crossings favored individuals with specific cognitive and physical traits, enhanced spatial navigation abilities, improved heat tolerance, better water conservation physiology, and most importantly, the mental toughness needed to continue when rational analysis suggested surrender. These traits became embedded in the human gene pool, contributing to the exceptional adaptability that would characterize human expansion for the next 100,000 years. Population genetics reveals additional insights into desert crossing success. The groups that successfully traversed the Sahara maintained genetic diversity despite their small numbers, suggesting sophisticated mating systems and social structures that actively prevented inbreeding while promoting cooperation. This genetic management required cultural innovations, kinship systems, marriage customs, and social institutions that balanced individual reproductive success with group survival needs. The crossing itself would have been an ordeal that tested every survival skill humans had developed. Imagine setting out across a landscape where a single navigational error could mean death, where water supplies had to be calculated with mathematical precision, where temperatures could kill through heat exhaustion during the day or hypothermia at night. Travel would have been carefully timed to take advantage of brief periods around dawn and dusk when temperatures were tolerable, with midday shelter and midnight rest periods that required precise planning and resource management. Daily routines during desert crossing required extraordinary discipline and coordination. Groups would rise before dawn to take advantage of cool temperatures, travel during the brief periods of moderate heat, SEEK shelter during the murderous midday sun, then resume travel during the evening cooldown. Night camps required careful site selection, efficient shelter construction, and resource conservation that left no room for waste or error. The psychological challenges of desert crossing were as demanding as the physical ordeals. The monotonous landscape, extreme discomfort, constant threat of death, and complete dependence on group cooperation created stress levels that could destroy individual sanity and group cohesion. Yet the evidence suggests that successful crossers developed psychological techniques, meditation practices, group rituals, storytelling traditions that maintain morale and unity during the worst conditions. Mental preparation for desert crossing required cognitive skills that went far beyond simple survival knowledge. Travelers had to develop extraordinary powers of concentration, memory, and decision-making under stress. The ability to maintain hope and determination when conditions became seemingly hopeless was perhaps the most crucial psychological trait of all. Archaeological evidence suggests that successful desert crossers developed ritual and spiritual practices that provided psychological support during the most challenging periods. Yet they succeeded, not through luck, but through a combination of preparation, innovation, and group cooperation that transformed an impossible journey into a repeatable achievement. The Sahara crossing represented the first time any species had conquered such an environment through pure technological and social innovation. The cognitive abilities and cultural systems developed during these crossings would provide the foundation for every subsequent human achievement. The success of Saharan crossings proved that human adaptability was limited only by imagination and determination. These desert masters had developed skills that enabled survival in Earth's most challenging terrestrial environment, but their achievement was even greater than mere survival. They had created replicable systems navigation techniques, resource management strategies, social organization methods that could be taught to others and applied to different challenges. But the desert crossing was just the beginning. Beyond the Sahara lay challenges that would demand even greater innovations: frozen wastelands, where the desert survival skills would prove useless, and vast oceans that would require technologies that hadn't yet been imagined. As the climate windows closed and the Sahara returned to its role as an impenetrable barrier, the successful crossing groups found themselves committed to a one-way journey. Behind them lay a wall of sand and heat that wouldn't reopen for 20,000 years. Ahead lay the unknown world of Eurasia, with challenges that would push human adaptability to its absolute limits. The ocean of sand had been crossed, but the real adventures were just beginning. The descendants of the desert masters carried with them more than survival skills. They possessed the psychological certainty that no environment was truly impossible to conquer. This confidence, born from the successful crossing of Earth's greatest desert, would drive human expansion into environments even more challenging than the Sahara. The masters of sand and heat were about to become the conquerors of ice and sea. Chapter 4: The Invention of the Impossible. Standing on the shoreline of what is now Indonesia 65,000 years ago, our ancestors faced their greatest challenge yet. Behind them lay thousands of miles of successful migration across ice, desert, and grassland. Ahead stretched an endless expanse of blue water 55 miles, of open ocean separating them from the invisible continent of Australia. No human had ever attempted such a crossing. No land mammal had ever succeeded. The journey would take them out of sight of land for days, across waters populated by sharks and storms, with no guarantee of reaching anything but empty ocean. Yet they built boats and set sail anyway, accomplishing what archaeologists now recognize as the most significant technological leap in human history: the invention of long-distance ocean navigation. This was uncoastal hopping or river crossing. This was open ocean voyaging that wouldn't be achieved again by any species for tens of thousands of years. The waters they faced were unlike anything that exists today. Sea levels during the Ice Age were 400 feet lower than modern levels, dramatically altering the geography of Southeast Asia. What is now a complex archipelago of thousands of islands was then a series of massive landmasses separated by relatively narrow straits. Sundaland, a continent-sized landmass that included modern Thailand, Malaysia, and western Indonesia, was connected by dry land. But even with lower sea levels, a formidable water barrier remained between Asia and Australia. The shortest crossing point required traversing at least 55 miles of open ocean, but this minimum distance assumed perfect navigation to an invisible target. More realistic crossing attempts would have faced distances of 70 to 90 miles, depending on departure points and ocean conditions. These weren't calm inland waters, but dynamic ocean environments subject to powerful currents, sudden storms, and seasonal weather patterns that could transform manageable crossings into death traps within hours. The evidence for this extraordinary achievement lies scattered across the archaeological sites of northern Australia. At Majedbe Rock Shelter in Arnhem Land, Excavations have uncovered stone tools, ochre pigments, and ground-edge axes dating to 65,000 years ago. These aren't the crude implements of desperate castaways, but sophisticated tool assemblages indicating established human presence. The artifacts show immediate adaptation to Australian conditions, specialized tools for processing local plants and hunting unique marsupials that existed nowhere else on Earth. But perhaps the most stunning evidence comes from what's missing. There is no trace of failed attempts. No archaeological evidence of groups that almost made it. No remains of primitive rafts that didn't survive the journey. No skeletal remains on intermediate islands, suggesting unsuccessful crossings. The crossing appears to have been successful from the very first attempt, suggesting a level of planning and technological sophistication that challenges every assumption about prehistoric human capabilities. The absence of failure evidence suggests that the ocean crossing wasn't a desperate gamble, but a carefully planned expedition based on extensive preparation and technological development. The groups that made the crossing had likely spent years or even decades developing the necessary skills, technologies, and knowledge systems. This was an accidental exploration, but deliberate colonization by people who had solved the technical challenges of open ocean navigation. The boats themselves have long since vanished. Organic materials do survive 65,000 years in tropical conditions, but we can reconstruct their design from the environmental constraints they had to overcome. The crossing would have required vessels capable of carrying at least 20 people, the minimum viable population for successful colonization, plus water, food, and essential tools for several days at sea. These boats had to be stable enough to handle ocean swells, maneuverable enough to make course corrections, and robust enough to survive the inevitable encounters with storms. The most likely design based on materials available in Southeast Asia and boat-building traditions that survived into historical times would have been massive bamboo rafts. Giant bamboo species common in the region could provide canes 8 inches in diameter and 60 feet long. These enormous plants represented perfect boat-building materials, lightweight but incredibly strong, naturally watertight, and available in lengths that could create vessels of unprecedented size and stability. Bamboo raft construction required sophisticated engineering principles that modern naval architects are only beginning to appreciate. The canes had to be selected for specific properties: younger bamboo for flexibility, mature sections for strength, and specialized joints for maximum water resistance. Lashing techniques using plant fibers created connections that were both flexible and strong, allowing the raft to bend with ocean swells while maintaining structural integrity. Advanced bamboo raft designs incorporated multiple hulls connected by flexible platforms, creating vessels that combined the stability of catamarans with the load-carrying capacity of cargo ships. These multi-hull designs distributed weight evenly while providing redundancy. Damage to one section wouldn't compromise the entire vessel. The connecting platforms provided space for passengers, cargo, and the extensive supplies needed for weeks-long ocean voyages. Waterproofing techniques utilized natural materials available throughout Southeast Asia. Plant resins could seal joints and create waterproof barriers, while animal fats provided additional protection against water infiltration. Some evidence suggests that early boat builders used heated plant materials to create primitive caulking compounds that could expand when wet to create tighter seals. Propulsion systems combined multiple technologies to provide reliable power under varying conditions. Palm frond sails could harness wind power when conditions were favorable, while their flexible construction allowed them to be quickly adjusted or removed during storms. Paddle systems provided backup propulsion and precise maneuvering capability, with long sweeping oars that could maintain forward motion even in adverse winds. But building the boats was only the beginning. The greater challenge was navigation across open ocean without instruments, maps, or any prior knowledge of what lay beyond the horizon. The success of the crossing suggests our ancestors had developed sophisticated understanding of oceanic navigation principles that wouldn't be formally understood for millennia. Ocean navigation in prehistoric conditions required integration of multiple information sources that had to be processed simultaneously while maintaining course toward an invisible target. Wind patterns provided directional information, but they changed throughout the day and varied with weather conditions. Ocean swells created consistent patterns that could indicate distant landmasses, but reading these patterns required experience and skill that took years to develop. Celestial navigation techniques had to account for the unique conditions of equatorial waters. Star positions that were reliable in northern latitudes became less useful near the equator, where many familiar constellations disappeared below the horizon. Navigation required knowledge of southern hemisphere star patterns that were completely different from those used during the overland journey through Asia. The behavior of marine life provided crucial navigation information that experienced seafarers could read like road signs. Seabirds that returned to roost on shore each evening indicated the direction of land, but different species had different ranging distances from their nesting sites. Flying fish patterns, dolphin behavior, and even the phosphorescence in water could indicate proximity to coral reefs or shallow areas that suggested nearby landmasses. Cloud formations over distant islands created distinctive patterns that could be detected from dozens of miles away. Land masses heated differently than open ocean, creating thermal currents that produced characteristic cloud formations. Experienced navigators could distinguish between clouds formed over islands and normal weather formations, providing visual cues to land that existed beyond the visible horizon. Ocean current patterns provided another navigation layer that required sophisticated understanding of marine dynamics. Currents could carry vessels off course if not properly accounted for, but they could also provide information about nearby landmasses and aid in navigation when properly utilized. Different currents had different temperatures and colors that experienced navigators could distinguish by sight and feel. Weather prediction became crucial for timing departures and avoiding dangerous conditions. The monsoon systems that dominate Southeast Asian weather patterns created seasonal windows of favorable sailing conditions. But these patterns varied from year to year and could change rapidly. The ability to predict weather changes days in advance was essential for safe ocean crossing. The timing of the crossing reveals another level of sophistication. The migrants timed their journey for a specific climatic window when monsoon winds provided favorable sailing conditions for northward travel. This required understanding weather patterns across seasons and years knowledge that could only be gained through careful observation and cultural transmission across generations. But the most remarkable aspect of the crossing may have been the water management systems that enabled survival during days at sea. Ocean crossing requires roughly 1 gallon of fresh water per person per day, meaning a 4-day crossing would require at least 80 gallons of water storage for a minimal crossing group. Larger groups or longer crossings would require proportionally more water, creating storage and weight challenges that tested the limits of bamboo raft design. Traditional water storage systems had to be completely reimagined for ocean conditions. Containers made from animal skins or plant materials had to be waterproofed not just against leakage, but against contamination from salt spray. Storage systems required protection from sun exposure that could cause rapid evaporation, while remaining accessible during the voyage for controlled distribution. Advanced water management included collection systems that could capture and store rainwater during the voyage. Sail configurations could be modified to channel rainwater into storage containers, potentially extending voyage duration and providing emergency water supplies. Some evidence suggests that early ocean voyagers understood techniques for extracting fresh water from marine sources, methods that wouldn't be rediscovered by European explorers for thousands of years. Food storage presented equally complex challenges that required innovation in preservation techniques and container design. Ocean crossings left no opportunity for hunting or gathering, so everything needed for survival had to be carried. The humid, salty conditions at sea created preservation challenges that were completely different from those encountered during overland travel. Dried meats and fish provided protein sources that could survive ocean conditions, but they required advanced preservation techniques that removed moisture while preventing spoilage. Concentrated plant foods, nuts, seeds, and processed fruit offered carbohydrate sources in compact, long-lasting forms. Some evidence suggests that early ocean voyagers had developed fermented food preparations that actually improved in nutritional value during extended storage. Container systems for food storage had to provide protection against moisture, pests, and contamination while remaining organized and accessible during the voyage. Multi-compartment storage systems allowed for separation of different food types and controlled access that prevented waste or overconsumption. Waterproof sealing techniques protected vital supplies against the inevitable water infiltration that occurred during ocean travel. The psychological challenge may have been the greatest of all. Imagine setting out across waters where the horizon shows only empty ocean, where storms can arise without warning, where a single navigational error means death for everyone aboard. These weren't experienced mariners with generations of seafaring tradition. They were land mammals attempting something their species had never done before. The mental preparation required for ocean crossing involved psychological techniques that enable groups to function effectively under extreme stress and uncertainty. Collaborative decision-making systems had to balance individual expertise with group consensus while maintaining effective leadership during crisis situations. Conflict resolution became a matter of group survival when interpersonal disputes could destroy the cooperation essential for navigation and resource management. Morale maintenance during multi-day ocean crossings required psychological techniques that are barely understood even today. The combination of physical discomfort, constant danger, social crowding, and complete dependence on group cooperation created stress levels that could destroy group cohesion and individual sanity. Successful ocean crossers likely developed rituals, storytelling traditions, and social practices that provided psychological support during the most challenging periods. Risk assessment and contingency planning required mental abilities that went far beyond normal survival skills. Ocean voyagers had to prepare for scenarios that had never been encountered: equipment failures, medical emergencies, navigation errors, and weather conditions that could develop without warning. The ability to maintain hope and effective decision-making when conditions became seemingly hopeless was perhaps the most crucial psychological trait of all. Yet they succeeded so completely that within a few thousand years, human populations had spread across the entire Australian continent, adapting to environments ranging from tropical rainforests to arid deserts. The speed of expansion across Australia suggests that the ocean crossing groups possessed not just survival skills but sophisticated colonization strategies that enabled rapid adaptation to completely new environments. Genetic evidence shows the founding population was small, but diverse enough to establish a thriving population that would remain genetically isolated from the rest of humanity for 50,000 years. The genetic bottleneck created by the ocean crossing had profound evolutionary implications, selecting for cognitive abilities, physical traits, and behavioral characteristics that enhanced survival in isolated island conditions. The Australia crossing represents more than just a successful migration. It demonstrates that 65,000 years ago, humans had developed cognitive abilities and technological capabilities that wouldn't be seen again until the dawn of recorded history. They had become a truly global species, capable of adapting to any environment Earth could offer through pure innovation and determination. But the greatest significance of the ocean crossing may be what it revealed about human potential. These weren't superhuman ancestors with capabilities we've lost. They were ordinary people who refused to accept that any challenge was impossible to overcome. They had developed the cognitive abilities, social cooperation, and technological innovation that would define human achievement for the next 65,000 years. The invention of the impossible had been achieved. Humans had proven that environmental barriers existed only until someone figured out how to overcome them. The ocean crossing to Australia proved that humans could navigate the impossible, but their success had also committed them to a path of constant innovation and expansion. Soon they would discover just how impossible their next challenge could be. Beyond Australia lay frozen wasteland of the far north, where survival would require every innovation they had developed, and new ones besides. The masters of open ocean navigation were about to become the conquerors of ice and snow, proving once again that for humans, the impossible was just another word for the not yet achieved. Knowledge of what lay beyond the horizon. The success of the crossing suggests our ancestors had developed sophisticated understanding of oceanic navigation principles that wouldn't be formally understood for millennia. They would have learned to read the subtle signs that indicate nearby land, the behavior of seabirds that return to roost on shore each evening, the patterns of clouds that form over islands, the phosphorescence in water that indicates coral reefs. Even the smell of land-based vegetation carried on offshore breezes. Ocean swells follow predictable patterns that can reveal the direction of distant landmasses, while star positions provide consistent directional references, even when coastlines disappear. The timing of the crossing reveals another level of sophistication. Sea levels during the Ice Age were 400 feet lower than today, dramatically reducing the ocean crossing distance. But the migrants timed their journey for a specific climatic window when monsoon winds provided favorable sailing conditions for northward travel. This required understanding weather patterns across seasons and years knowledge that could only be gained through careful observation and cultural transmission across generations. Water procurement for the journey presents another engineering challenge that our ancestors somehow solved. Ocean crossing requires roughly 1 gallon of fresh water per person per day, meaning a 4-day crossing would require at least 80 gallons of water storage for a minimal crossing group. Traditional containers made from animal skins or hollowed gourds could provide this capacity, but they would need to be waterproofed and secured against the inevitable rough seas. Food storage was equally critical. Ocean crossings leave no opportunity for hunting or gathering, so everything needed for survival had to be carried. Archaeological evidence suggests the migrants brought sophisticated food preservation techniques, dried meats, concentrated plant foods, and possibly fermented preparations that could provide nutrition in compact, long-lasting forms. The psychological challenge may have been the greatest of all. Imagine setting out across waters where the horizon shows only empty ocean, where storms can arise without warning, where a single navigational error means death for everyone aboard. These were inexperienced mariners with generations of seafaring tradition. They were land mammals attempting something their species had never done before. Yet they succeeded so completely that within a few thousand years, human populations had spread across the entire Australian continent, adapting to environments ranging from tropical rainforests to arid deserts. Genetic evidence shows the founding population was small, but diverse enough to establish a thriving population that would remain genetically isolated from the rest of humanity for 50,000 years. The Australia crossing represents more than just a successful migration. It demonstrates that 65,000 years ago, humans had developed cognitive abilities and technological capabilities that would not be seen again until the dawn of recorded history. They had become a truly global species, capable of adapting to any environment Earth could offer. But the greatest challenges still lay ahead in the frozen wasteland of the far north, where survival would require every innovation they had developed, and new ones besides. The ocean crossing to Australia proved that humans could navigate the impossible. Soon they would discover just how impossible their next challenge could be. Chapter 5. Lords of the Frozen Realm. The Yana River site in northern Siberia at 71 degrees north latitude, well above the Arctic Circle, stands as testament to perhaps the most remarkable survival achievement in human history. Here, 30,000 years ago, during the depth of the last ice age, sophisticated human societies weren't just surviving, but thriving in conditions so extreme they would challenge modern Arctic explorers equipped with advanced technology. The world these Arctic pioneers inhabited was radically different from anything that exists today. The mammoth steppes stretched across northern Eurasia like a frozen ocean of grass, supporting ecosystems so rich and diverse. They challenge modern understanding of what's possible in extreme environments. This wasn't the barren tundra we associate with the Arctic today, but a productive grassland ecosystem that supported biomass densities comparable to modern African savannas. Winter temperatures regularly dropped to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes and kill through hypothermia in less than an hour. But temperature was only one element of the Arctic challenge. Wind chill could drive effective temperatures below -70 degrees, while blizzards with hurricane-force winds created whiteout conditions that could last for days. For 6 months of the year, the sun never rose above the horizon, leaving the landscape in perpetual twilight broken only by the dancing curtains of the aurora borealis. The psychological impact of Arctic winter was perhaps as challenging as the physical conditions. The combination of extreme cold, social isolation, and sensory deprivation created conditions that could break human sanity within weeks. Modern research on seasonal affective disorder and cabin fever provides insight into the mental challenges faced by Ice Age Arctic dwellers, but they had no understanding of psychology or mental health. Only the empirical knowledge that some techniques worked and others led to madness or death. Yet archaeological evidence tells a story not of desperate survival, but of cultural flourishing that challenges every assumption about human adaptability. Over 2,500 stone tools have been recovered from the Yana site alone, representing one of the most sophisticated tool assemblages from the Ice Age. These were uncrewed implements hastily made for emergency survival, but carefully crafted instruments that required years of training to produce and represented accumulated knowledge passed down through generations. The stone tool technology found at Arctic sites reveals manufacturing techniques that approached industrial levels of sophistication. Raw materials were selected from sources hundreds of miles away, indicating trade networks or seasonal migration patterns that connected Arctic communities across vast distances. Tool production involved multiple stages of refinement, with rough blanks being transported long distances before final shaping at specialized production sites. Different tool types were designed for specific Arctic challenges that existed nowhere else on Earth. Ice chisels for cutting through frozen ground, specialized scrapers for processing hides at sub-zero temperatures, and composite tools that combine multiple functions in single implements designed to minimize weight and bulk during travel. Some tools show evidence of hafting systems that allowed rapid reconfiguration for different tasks, essential efficiency in environments where tool failure could mean death. The most remarkable find is a delicate-eyed needle carved from a woolly rhinoceros horn. Its eye so small and precisely formed that creating it would challenge modern craftspeople using power tools. This tiny implement represents far more than a simple sewing tool. It is evidence of a technological revolution that enabled human survival in Earth's most hostile environments. The needle's discovery reveals the true secret weapon that allowed humans to conquer the Arctic. Clothing systems so sophisticated they represented humanity's first venture into environmental engineering. These weren't simple animal hide wrappings, but complex technological systems that created artificial microclimates around the human body, enabling tropical primates to survive in conditions that challenged animals specifically evolved for Arctic conditions. Archaeological evidence from permafrost sites across Siberia and Alaska reveals clothing construction that was engineered with principles that would not be formally understood until the development of modern thermodynamics. The layering systems consisted of multiple components, each designed for specific thermal and moisture management functions that had to work together as integrated systems. The base layer, worn directly against the skin, was made from the softest available materials, processed bird down, rabbit fur, or specially prepared plant fibers. These materials were selected not just for comfort, but for their ability to wick moisture away from the skin while maintaining insulation properties even when damp. The processing techniques required to create these materials involved complex chemical treatments using plant and animal products that transformed raw materials into specialized fabrics. Construction of base layer garments required sewing techniques that created seams capable of stretching with body movement while maintaining thermal properties. Thread was manufactured from processed plant fibers, animal sinews, and sometimes human hair, each selected for specific properties needed for different garment areas. Some seams incorporated waterproofing techniques that prevented moisture infiltration while allowing vapor transfer, principles that modern outdoor clothing manufacturers struggle to achieve. Middle layers provided the primary insulation while managing moisture transfer from inner layers to outer shells. Reindeer hide was the preferred material because of its unique thermal properties. Each hair is hollow, creating microscopic air pockets that provide exceptional insulation while remaining lightweight. But processing reindeer hide for Arctic clothing required sophisticated tanning techniques that maintain flexibility at extreme temperatures while preventing the cracking and stiffening that would make movement impossible. The tanning process involved multiple chemical treatments using plant materials, animal products, and fermentation techniques that could take months to complete. Hides were processed through cycles of soaking, stretching, chemical treatment, and mechanical working that transformed raw skins into materials with properties specifically tailored for Arctic conditions. Different areas of the hide were processed using different techniques to create materials with varying properties within single garments. Pattern design for Arctic clothing required sophisticated understanding of human anatomy, thermal dynamics, and the physics of heat transfer. Garments were tailored to individual body measurements while incorporating design features that optimized thermal performance. Areas of high heat loss, neck, wrists, ankles, received special attention with overlapping layers and adjustable closures that could be fine-tuned for different activity levels and weather conditions. Outer layer construction provided weather protection while allowing moisture transfer from inner layers. Sealskin was preferred for its natural waterproofing properties, but processing sealskin for clothing required different techniques than those used for terrestrial animals. The natural oils in sealskin had to be preserved and redistributed to maintain waterproofing while creating flexibility needed for movement. Some outer garments incorporated ventilation systems that could be opened or closed depending on activity level and weather conditions. These systems prevented dangerous overheating during strenuous activity, followed by rapid cooling, a thermal management challenge that kills modern outdoor enthusiasts who lack proper equipment. Vent placement and sizing required understanding of body heat distribution and air circulation patterns that represented sophisticated engineering principles. Boot construction represented perhaps the greatest technical challenge of Arctic clothing systems. Feet had to be protected from ground temperatures that could reach -50 degrees while maintaining the dexterity needed for hunting and tool use. Arctic footwear consisted of multiple components that functioned as integrated thermal management systems. Outer boot shells were constructed from waterproof materials, usually seal or walrus hide, that provided protection against snow and moisture while maintaining flexibility at extreme temperatures. The sole construction involved multiple layers. Outer soils that provided traction on ice and snow, middle layers that insulated feet from ground contact, and inner soils that could be removed for drying and replacement. Insulation layers within boots use materials selected for their ability to maintain thermal properties even when compressed by body weight during walking. Grass, fur, down, and processed plant materials were combined in specific ratios to create insulation systems that provided warmth without bulk. Some boot designs incorporated air spaces that utilized trapped body heat for additional warming. Inner boot linings were removable and washable, essential for hygiene and moisture management during extended wear. These linings were often made from soft fur materials that provided comfort while wicking moisture away from feet. The ability to remove and dry inner linings prevented the foot infections and frostbite that could disable hunters during critical winter periods. Glove and mitten systems provided hand protection while maintaining the dexterity needed for tool use and weapon operation. Hand coverings consisted of multiple layers, thin inner gloves that provided basic warmth while maintaining finger sensitivity, insulating middle layers that could be added for extra warmth, and outer shells that provided weather protection and palm reinforcement for tool use. Some hand covering systems incorporated convertible designs that could function as mittens for maximum warmth during travel or as fingerless gloves for tasks requiring fine motor control. The engineering of these conversion systems required sophisticated closure mechanisms that functioned reliably at extreme temperatures while providing secure attachment that prevented accidental loss. Headwear design was crucial for survival since the human head loses a disproportionate amount of body heat in cold conditions. Arctic head coverings incorporated multiple design elements: insulation layers that maintain warmth around the brain, wind protection that sealed against Arctic gales, and vision systems that protected eyes from snow blindness while maintaining visibility for hunting and navigation. Some headwear incorporated breathing systems that pre-warmed incoming air while preventing dangerous moisture buildup from exhaled breath. These systems utilized complex air circulation patterns that mix cold incoming air with warmed exhaled air, reducing the thermal shock of breathing extreme cold while preventing the ice formation that could block airways. The clothing was just one element of Arctic survival. The fuel crisis that should have been fatal was solved through remarkable innovation that transformed waste products into essential resources. Wood was virtually non-existent in the Arctic tundra, but the inhabitants of Yana had discovered that mammoth bones could provide all the fuel needed for survival through the long Arctic winter. The science behind bone fuel reveals sophisticated understanding of combustion chemistry that wouldn't be formally understood for thousands of years. Mammoth bones contained high levels of fat and marrow that made them extremely effective fuel sources. The fat content created high-energy combustion that produced more heat per pound than many types of wood, while the bone structure provided a matrix that sustained combustion over extended periods. Different bones were selected for different burning characteristics and uses. Long bones provided sustained heat for overnight burning, while flat bones offered quick heating for cooking and emergency warmth. Skull fragments were processed for rapid ignition during emergency situations, while vertebrae were preferred for specialized applications like metalworking and tool manufacturing that required specific temperature ranges. Bone processing for fuel involved techniques that maximize burning efficiency while extracting other useful materials. Marrow was removed for food use while preserving the bone matrix for fuel. Fat was rendered for multiple purposes: waterproofing, tool lubrication, and fuel enhancement, while bone powder was collected for use in hide processing and other applications. Storage and management of bone fuel required sophisticated planning and organization. Archaeological evidence shows organized stockpiles of bones sorted by type, size, and burning characteristics. Different storage techniques were used for different bone types. Some required protection from moisture, others needed air circulation to prevent spoilage, and emergency supplies were cached in locations that remained accessible even during severe weather. Fire management in Arctic conditions demanded skills that modern people can barely comprehend. Starting fires at -40 degrees required techniques and materials specifically adapted to extreme cold. Traditional fire starting methods failed at extreme temperatures, forcing the development of specialized techniques that could create ignition even when conventional materials wouldn't function. Fire-starting materials included specially prepared tinder that remained combustible despite extreme cold and moisture. Fungi were processed using fermentation techniques that created materials that could ignite even when frozen. Animal fats were processed into forms that could provide sustained ignition energy, while plant materials were chemically treated to enhance combustibility. Fire maintenance techniques ensured that fires remained active throughout the long Arctic winter. Banking methods allowed fires to smolder for hours without attention, while rapid revival techniques could restore full combustion from minimal embers. Some fire management systems utilize multiple fire locations within single shelters, providing redundancy against accidental extinction while distributing heat more evenly. Fuel efficiency techniques maximized heat production while minimizing fuel consumption. Fire construction methods created combustion patterns that extracted maximum energy from available fuel while producing minimal smoke, essential in enclosed shelters where ventilation was limited. Heat distribution systems utilized thermal mass and air circulation to maximize the heating efficiency of limited fuel supplies. Shelter construction in the Arctic reached levels of sophistication that wouldn't be seen again for millennia. These were not temporary survival structures, but permanent winter residences designed for months of continuous habitation by extended family groups. The engineering principles involved thermal management, structural design, and resource optimization represented technological achievements that rivaled modern Arctic construction. Site selection for Arctic shelters required understanding of microclimate factors that could mean the difference between survival and death. Locations had to provide protection from prevailing winds while maximizing solar exposure during the brief periods of winter daylight. Drainage considerations prevented water infiltration during spring thaw, while access to fuel and water sources had to be balanced against defensive considerations. Foundation construction began with excavation into the permafrost using stone tools, a task that required tremendous labor and sophisticated techniques for cutting through frozen ground. The depth and design of foundations provided thermal management that created temperature zones within shelters, with sleeping areas positioned to take advantage of heat distribution patterns. Framework construction utilized mammoth bones selected for specific structural properties. Femurs provided primary load-bearing elements, while ribs created secondary structure and skull fragments provided specialized joints. The bone selection process required understanding of structural engineering principles, load distribution, stress concentration, and material properties that enabled these frameworks to support enormous loads, while remaining stable through thermal cycling. Bone framework assembly utilized joining techniques that created strong, flexible connections capable of handling the stress of thermal expansion and contraction. Some joints incorporated organic binding materials that provided flexibility while maintaining strength. The overall framework design created dome-like structures that distributed loads evenly while maximizing internal volume relative to material usage. Insulation systems over the bone frameworks consisted of multiple layers designed for different thermal and structural functions. Sod layers cut from summer tundra provided thermal mass and basic insulation while maintaining structural strength. The root systems in tundra sod created natural reinforcement that prevented settlement and maintained insulation properties over time. Animal hide layers provided weather sealing and additional insulation, while creating interior surfaces that could be maintained and replaced as needed. Different hide types were used for different applications. mammoth hides for structural strength, reindeer hides for insulation, and smaller animal skins for specialized applications like door coverings and ventilation control. Interior spatial organization reflected sophisticated understanding of thermal dynamics and human comfort requirements. Sleeping areas were elevated to take advantage of rising warm air while remaining accessible during severe weather. Work areas were positioned to utilize available light and heat, while providing space for essential activities like tool manufacturing and food preparation. Storage systems within shelters provided organization and protection for the extensive equipment needed for Arctic survival. Elevated storage protected valuable items from moisture and pests while maintaining accessibility. Different storage zones were designed for different material types: food storage in the coldest areas, tool storage in moderate temperature zones, and clothing storage in areas that provided protection while allowing air circulation. Ventilation systems prevented carbon monoxide buildup while minimizing heat loss, a balance that required sophisticated understanding of air circulation and combustion dynamics. Vent placement and sizing created circulation patterns that removed combustion products while maintaining positive pressure that prevented cold air infiltration. Interior climate control utilized multiple techniques to create comfortable living conditions within Arctic shelters. Thermal mass systems stored heat during peak combustion periods and released it gradually over time. Air circulation systems distributed heat evenly while preventing the stratification that could create dangerous temperature variations. The hunting technologies developed for Arctic conditions were revolutionary advances that enabled exploitation of prey species that existed nowhere else on Earth. Traditional hunting methods proved inadequate for Arctic megafauna, forcing innovations in weapon design, hunting strategy, and prey processing that represented completely new approaches to human subsistence. Projectile weapons designed for Arctic hunting were larger and more robust than their temperate climate counterparts. Spear points had to penetrate not just skin and muscle, but thick layers of fur, fat, and hide that could stop conventional weapons. Point design incorporated barbing systems that prevented withdrawal once embedded, while hafting techniques ensured weapons remained attached during violent encounters with massive prey. Spear thrower technology multiplied throwing force while maintaining accuracy at distances up to 100 yards. These ladles represented sophisticated engineering achievements that utilized lever principles to amplify human muscle power. Different thrower designs were optimized for different hunting scenarios: long-range accuracy for initial strikes, close-range power for finishing wounded animals, and specialized designs for hunting from concealment. Hunting strategies evolved to match the unprecedented scale and behavior of Arctic prey. Mammoth hunting required coordinated efforts involving entire communities and represented the most complex hunting operations ever attempted by prehistoric peoples. These hunts required months of preparation, sophisticated planning, and flawless execution under conditions where failure meant starvation for entire communities. Mammoth tracking techniques utilized knowledge of animal behavior patterns that took generations to accumulate. Hunters learned to predict mammoth movements based on weather patterns, seasonal cycles, and social behaviors specific to different herd structures. Tracking skills had to function in conditions where traditional sign-reading techniques were obscured by snow and ice. Hunting party organization involved specialists with different skills and responsibilities. Trackers identified and followed prey over vast distances, while specialists in animal behavior predicted movement patterns and selected optimal hunting locations. Weapons specialists maintained and deployed the complex arsenal needed for mammoth hunting, while processing experts organized the butchering operations that could turn a single mammoth into resources for an entire community. The actual hunting process involved elaborate strategies designed to maximize success while minimizing risk to human participants. Drive techniques used terrain features and coordinated human activity to channel mammoth herds toward prepared locations where geography provided advantages. Multiple hunting parties coordinated their activities using communication systems that functioned over distances of several miles. Mammoth kill sites show evidence of sophisticated processing operations that maximize the use of every part of massive carcasses. Butchering techniques were designed to process animals weighing up to 6 tons using only stone tools, requiring organizational systems that prevented waste while providing immediate preservation of perishable materials. But perhaps the greatest achievement of these Arctic pioneers was psychological. They had developed mental techniques that enabled not just survival, but cultural flourishing in Earth's most hostile environments. The Arctic wasn't just physically challenging, it was mentally devastating. The combination of extreme conditions, social isolation, and constant threat of death created psychological pressures that destroyed many modern explorers despite extensive preparation and support systems. Archaeological evidence reveals sophisticated cultural systems that provided psychological support and social cohesion during the long Arctic winter. Our objects carved from mammoth ivory demonstrate aesthetic sensibilities that went far beyond basic survival needs. These sculptures required artistic vision and technical skill while representing cultural values and social identities that maintained group cohesion. Music and storytelling traditions, while not directly preserved in the archaeological record, can be inferred from the complexity of social systems that enabled Arctic survival. The knowledge needed to survive in these environments, animal behavior patterns, weather prediction, tool manufacturing techniques, and hunting strategies was too complex to maintain without sophisticated information storage and transmission systems. These lords of the frozen realm had accomplished something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. They had taken a tropical species and made it capable of thriving in environments that challenged animals specifically evolved for extreme conditions. They had developed technologies that wouldn't be significantly improved upon for thousands of years, and social systems that enabled complex cooperative activities under the most challenging conditions imaginable. Their success proved that human adaptability was limited only by imagination and determination. The cognitive abilities, technological innovations, and social systems developed during the Arctic colonization would provide the foundation for every subsequent human achievement. The masters of fire and ice had prepared themselves for whatever impossible challenges lay ahead, carrying with them the ultimate survival toolkit, not just material technologies, but the mental abilities and cultural systems that made those technologies possible. Chapter 6: Bridge to a New World. 20,000 years ago, the Bering Land Bridge stretched across 1,000 miles of what is now ocean floor, connecting Siberia to Alaska in a vast tundra grassland larger than Texas and California combined. This wasn't a narrow crossing, but a continent-sized highway populated by massive herds of mammoth, bison, horses, and predators unlike anything alive today. For the human masters of the Arctic, it represented the final frontier, a pathway to an empty world waiting to be discovered. The bridge itself was a miracle of Ice Age geography. With billions of gallons of water locked in massive ice sheets, global sea levels had dropped by 400 feet, exposing a landmass that had been underwater for millions of years. But this wasn't simply dry ocean floor. It was a unique ecosystem that supported the richest concentration of large mammals the world had ever seen. Beringia, as scientists now call it, was unlike anywhere on Earth today. The climate was dry and cold, but not completely frozen, creating vast grasslands that supported incredible biodiversity. Steppe bison, twice the size of modern buffalo, grazed alongside woolly mammoths whose tusks could span 16 feet. Giant short-faced bears, standing 12 feet tall on their hind legs, dominated the predator landscape, while American cheetahs and massive lions hunted prey that dwarfed modern African game. For the humans approaching from the west, Beringia represented both unprecedented opportunity and extraordinary challenge. These weren't the familiar Arctic environments they had mastered in Siberia. This was a dynamic ecosystem in constant change, where traditional hunting strategies had to be completely reimagined for prey species that existed nowhere else on Earth. Archaeological evidence suggests the first humans entered Beringia around 25,000 years ago, but they weren't heading for America. DNA analysis of modern Native American populations reveals a complex genetic picture. The founding population spent thousands of years on the land bridge itself, isolated from both Asia and America, developing into a distinct human population that would become the ancestors of all Native Americans. This Beringian standstill, as geneticists call it, lasted for perhaps 10,000 years. During this time, the human population was cut off from their Siberian relatives by advancing glaciers and prevented from moving south by a massive ice sheet that covered most of what is now Canada. They were marooned in the middle of a continent-sized hunting preserve, forced to develop entirely new survival strategies for an ecosystem that would soon vanish forever. The technology they developed was revolutionary. Traditional Arctic hunting techniques proved inadequate for Beringian megafauna, forcing innovations in weapon design, hunting strategy, and social organization. Spear points found at Beringian sites show radical departures from earlier designs, larger, stronger, and engineered for penetrating the thick hides of massive prey animals. The famous Clovis points that would later spread across North America were perfected during this Beringian period. These weren't simple spear tips, but sophisticated engineering achievements, featuring complex fluting techniques that reduced weight while maximizing penetration power. Each point required hours of skilled knapping and represented accumulated knowledge passed down through generations of master craftsmen. Hunting strategies evolved to match the unprecedented scale of Beringian prey. Archaeological evidence from mammoth kill sites reveals coordinated hunts involving dozens of hunters working together to bring down individual animals that could feed a community for months. These operations required sophisticated planning, precise timing, and social organization on a scale that dwarfed anything attempted by earlier human societies. But perhaps the greatest innovation was logistical. The huge carcasses produced by successful hunts created both tremendous opportunities and massive challenges. A single mammoth could provide 10,000 pounds of meat, fat, bone, and hide enough to supply a large community for an entire season, but far too much to consume before spoilage. The Beringians developed preservation techniques that allowed them to store meat through the brief Arctic summers when temperatures rose above freezing. Underground ice cellars dug into permafrost could preserve meat for years, while smoking and drying techniques created concentrated food sources that could be transported during seasonal migrations. Fat rendering produced high-energy foods that could be stored in waterproof containers made from processed animal organs. These preservation technologies were so effective that they remained virtually unchanged among Arctic peoples into the 20th century. Social organization reached new levels of complexity during the Beringian period. The scale of megafauna hunting required cooperation between multiple family groups, creating the first large-scale human societies in the Americas. Leadership structures evolved to coordinate hunting expeditions, manage resource distribution, and maintain the complex knowledge systems needed for survival in this unique environment. Trade networks developed across thousands of miles of tundra, with distinctive tool materials appearing hundreds of miles from their geological sources. Obsidian from Alaskan volcanoes has been found at sites in eastern Beringia, while amber from Arctic beaches traveled westward to Siberian communities. These exchange networks weren't just economic, they were lifelines that maintained genetic diversity and cultural exchange across vast distances. The Beringian humans developed seasonal migration patterns that followed the great herds across the continent-sized landscape. Summer camps were positioned near calving grounds where massive herds of bison and mammoth could be easily hunted during the brief season of abundance. Winter camps were established and protected valleys with access to fuel sources and cache supplies that could sustain communities through months of darkness and cold. But the land bridge was living on borrowed time. As global climate began to warm around 15,000 years ago, the massive ice sheets that had created Beringia began their inexorable retreat. Rising sea levels slowly ate away at the edges of the continent-sized grassland, while changing precipitation patterns altered the vegetation that supported the great herds. The opening to the south came suddenly in geological terms. A narrow corridor between the retreating Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets provided the first pathway into the heart of North America in thousands of years. Archaeological evidence suggests the first groups moved through this corridor around 15,000 years ago, carrying with them the accumulated innovations of 10,000 years of Beringian adaptation. What they found beyond the ice was a continent of unimaginable abundance. Pristine ecosystems stretched from the Arctic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico, populated by megafauna that had never encountered human hunters. Giant ground sloths the size of automobiles browsed in forests where mastodons trumpeted among trees that had grown undisturbed for millennia. Saber-toothed cats stalked prey through grasslands where horses and camels grazed alongside creatures that existed nowhere else on Earth. The speed of human expansion across the Americas was breathtaking. Archaeological sites from Alaska to Chile show that humans had traversed the entire length of both continents in less than 2,000 years, a colonization rate of roughly a mile per month, across 11,000 miles of diverse terrain. This wasn't a gradual population spread, but an explosive expansion that reached the southern tip of South America, almost as quickly as it reached the eastern coast of North America. But with human arrival came ecological catastrophe on a scale never before seen. Within a few thousand years of human colonization, 80% of North American megafauna species went extinct. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, short-faced bears, and dozens of other species that had survived millions of years of climate change succumbed to the devastating efficiency of human hunters armed with Clovis technology. The Beringian Gateway had made possible the greatest expansion in human history, but it also marked the end of an era. As rising seas finally submerged the last of the land bridge around 11,000 years ago, the New World populations were cut off from Asia. The bridge to the New World had served its purpose. Humanity had completed its conquest of Earth's habitable environments, transforming from a small African population into a truly global species. But the story of human adaptation was far from over. The challenges of ice, desert, and ocean had forged innovations that would echo through history, and the descendants of these early pioneers would go on to create civilizations, technologies, and cultures that would reshape the entire planet. Chapter 7. The Ultimate Survivors. By 10,000 years ago, the last ice sheets were retreating, sea levels were rising, and the world was transforming into the landscapes we recognize today. Humanity had accomplished something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. A single species had successfully colonized every habitable environment on the planet, from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforest, from mountain peaks to ocean islands. But the true measure of this achievement wasn't just geographic. It was evolutionary. In less than 100,000 years, humans had transformed from a localized African species into something entirely new, the ultimate adaptive organism. They had developed technologies, social systems, and cognitive abilities that allowed them to survive in environments that should have been impossible for a tropical primate. More remarkably, they had done it without any significant biological evolution. The humans who conquered the Arctic were genetically virtually identical to their African ancestors. The secret lay in what scientists now recognize as humanity's greatest innovation: cumulative culture. Unlike other species that adapt to new environments through biological evolution over thousands of generations, humans adapted through cultural evolution that could occur within a single lifetime. Each generation built upon the innovations of their predecessors, creating an accelerating spiral of technological and social advancement that allowed unprecedented environmental mastery. Consider the trajectory of human innovation over this period. The first humans to leave Africa carried a toolkit of perhaps a dozen different stone implements and the knowledge of fire control. By the time humans reached Australia, they had added sophisticated boat building, ocean navigation, and complex hunting technologies. Arctic adaptation required the development of tailored clothing, advanced shelter construction, and fuel management systems. The colonization of the Americas demanded innovations in large-scale hunting, food preservation, and social organization. Each of these innovations represented solutions to specific environmental challenges, but their cumulative effect was to create a species with unprecedented adaptability. A human born in the African savanna could, through cultural learning, acquire the skills needed to survive in Arctic tundra, navigate open ocean, or hunt megafauna in completely novel ecosystems. The cognitive abilities that made this possible had been evolving for millions of years, but they reached full expression during this period of global colonization. Language allowed precise transmission of complex information across generations. Abstract thinking enabled humans to plan for future challenges and develop solutions to problems they hadn't yet encountered. Social cooperation permitted group efforts that no individual could accomplish alone. But perhaps most importantly, humans had developed what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to think about thinking. They could analyze their own problem-solving processes, recognize patterns across different situations, and consciously improve their adaptive strategies. This wasn't just learning from experience, it was learning how to learn more effectively. The archaeological record reveals this cognitive revolution in the increasing sophistication of human artifacts and behaviors. Early stone tools were simple, functional implements that changed little over hundreds of thousands of years. But during the period of global expansion, tool technology showed rapid innovation and regional specialization. Humans were no longer just using tools. They were engineering solutions to specific challenges. Art and symbolic behavior exploded during this period, with cave paintings, carved figurines, and decorative objects appearing across the inhabited world. This wasn't mere decoration, it was evidence of abstract thinking, symbolic communication, and cultural identity that allowed human groups to maintain cohesion across vast distances and challenging environments. The development of trade networks spanning thousands of miles revealed another crucial adaptation: the ability to think beyond immediate survival needs. Humans were investing time and energy in acquiring materials and information that might not provide immediate benefits, but could prove crucial in future challenges. This long-term thinking gave them unprecedented resilience in the face of environmental change. Social innovations were equally important. The complex coordination required for activities like mammoth hunting or ocean crossing demanded new forms of leadership, decision-making, and conflict resolution. Humans developed social technologies, customs, traditions, and institutions that allowed large groups to function effectively even under extreme stress. The speed of human expansion across the globe also reveals another crucial adaptation: the willingness to take calculated risks. Each major migration involved groups deliberately leaving known environments for unknown territories with no guarantee of success. This risk-taking behavior, balanced by careful planning and preparation, allowed humans to exploit opportunities that more cautious species would have missed. Perhaps most remarkably, humans had learned to modify their environments rather than simply adapting to them. The use of fire to manage landscapes, the construction of shelters that created artificial climates, and the development of clothing systems that extended their thermal comfort zone all represented active environmental modification. Humans weren't just adapting to nature, they were reshaping it to meet their needs. By the end of the Ice Age, these ultimate survivors had established populations on every continent except Antarctica. They had developed technologies that wouldn't be significantly improved upon for thousands of years. They had created social systems capable of transmitting complex knowledge across generations and vast distances. Most importantly, they had proven that the limits of human adaptability were defined not by biology, but by imagination and determination. The challenges of ice, desert, and ocean had been conquered, but they had left their mark on human nature. The cognitive abilities, social systems, and technological innovations developed during this period of global colonization would provide the foundation for every subsequent human achievement. Agriculture, cities, writing, and eventually industrial civilization all traced their roots to the adaptive capabilities forged during humanity's first conquest of the impossible. Chapter 8. Mastering the waves. The vast Pacific Ocean stretches across 1/3 of Earth's surface, its island chains separated by thousands of miles of open water. To early humans emerging from the Ice Age, it represented the ultimate barrier distances, so vast that even modern ships take days to cross them. Yet between 3,000 and 1,000 years ago, Polynesian navigators accomplished what remains one of the greatest feats of exploration in human history. They colonized virtually every habitable island in the Pacific, from Easter Island to New Zealand, using nothing but traditional sailing craft and navigation techniques passed down through generations. The Polynesian expansion represents the culmination of humanity's mastery over ocean environments. These weren't accidental discoveries or one-way suicide missions. They were carefully planned voyages of colonization that required navigation technologies, boat-building techniques, and ocean survival skills that wouldn't be matched by any other culture for thousands of years. The vessels that made this expansion possible were marvels of prehistoric engineering. Traditional Polynesian voyaging canoes were actually sophisticated sailing craft specifically designed for long distance ocean travel. The basic design consisted of 2 parallel hulls connected by a flexible platform that could handle the stress of ocean swells while remaining light enough for speed and maneuverability. These double-hulled canoes, or wakalua, could stretch up to 100 feet in length and carry loads of 20 tons, while maintaining the ability to sail closer to the wind than most modern yachts. The hulls were carved from massive trees using traditional tools, then carefully shaped to hydrodynamic principles that modern naval architects are only beginning to fully understand. The connecting platform provided space for passengers, cargo, and the extensive supplies needed for weeks-long ocean voyages. But the boats were only one element of Polynesian ocean mastery. The navigation techniques developed by Polynesian wayfinders represent perhaps the most sophisticated non-instrument navigation system ever created. These navigators could determine their position and course across thousands of miles of empty ocean using only natural phenomena, star patterns, ocean swells, wind directions, cloud formations, and subtle environmental cues invisible to untrained observers. The navigation system was based on what Polynesians called the star compass, a mental map of the sky that divided the horizon into 32 directional houses, each associated with specific stars and their rising and setting points. Master navigators memorized the movements of dozens of stars throughout the year, creating a celestial GPS system that remained accurate across vast ocean distances. But star navigation was just the beginning. Polynesian wayfinders learned to read ocean swells with extraordinary precision, detecting the subtle wave patterns that revealed the presence of distant islands. Ocean swells follow predictable patterns as they bend around landmasses, creating interference patterns that can be detected hundreds of miles away by navigators. trained to feel these minute variations through the hull of their vessel. Weather patterns provided another navigation layer. Experienced navigators could predict wind shifts days in advance, allowing them to plan courses that took advantage of seasonal wind patterns while avoiding dangerous weather systems. Cloud formations revealed the presence of islands beyond the horizon, the characteristic cloud caps that form over landmasses, the green reflection of lagoons on low clouds, even the distinctive flight patterns of seabirds returning to roost. Each evening, the psychological challenges of Polynesian voyaging were as demanding as the technical aspects. Imagine setting out across empty ocean for voyages lasting several weeks, guided only by traditional knowledge and natural navigation techniques with no backup systems or rescue possibilities. These weren't short coastal hops but deliberate expeditions across thousands of miles of open water to islands that might or might not exist. The colonization voyages were even more challenging because they carried not just navigators and crew, but entire communities, men, women, children, animals, and plants needed to establish new settlements. Archaeological evidence shows that Polynesian colonists brought with them pigs, dogs, chickens, and dozens of plant species, including taro, breadfruit, coconuts, and sweet potatoes. These weren't exploration voyages, but permanent relocations, requiring careful planning of supplies, personnel, and equipment. The speed and success of Polynesian expansion across the Pacific was remarkable. From their origin points in the Western Pacific, Polynesian navigators reached the Marquesas Islands around 300 CE, Hawaii by 600 CE, Easter Island by 1000 CE, and New Zealand by 1200 CI. In less than 1,000 years, they had discovered and colonized virtually every habitable island across an ocean spanning 10,000 miles. Perhaps most remarkably, they did it twice. Recent archaeological evidence suggests that Polynesian navigators reached the Americas, establishing contact with pre-Columbian civilizations and returning with New World crops like sweet potatoes that became staples throughout Polynesia. This means that Polynesian navigators had achieved what Columbus is credited with, establishing contact between the Old and New Worlds. But they did it using traditional sailing craft and navigation techniques rather than European maritime technology. The Polynesian achievement represents the final chapter in humanity's conquest of Earth's environments. They had succeeded where every other species had failed, developing the technological and cognitive abilities needed to thrive in environments that should have been impossible for land mammals. From the African savanna to Arctic tundra, from desert crossings to ocean voyaging, humans had proven themselves the ultimate adaptive species. But the Polynesian expansion also marked the end of an era. By 1000 CE, humans had discovered virtually every habitable environment on Earth. The age of exploration driven by survival necessity was ending, to be replaced by exploration driven by curiosity, commerce, and conquest. The fundamental survival skills developed during humanity's first global expansion would provide the foundation for all subsequent achievements. But the desperate ingenuity of early human adaptation would never again be tested on such a scale. As we stand here in the 21st century, surrounded by technologies our ancestors could never have imagined, it's worth remembering that every human achievement traces its roots back to those first brave groups who refused to accept that any environment was truly impossible to conquer. The same cognitive abilities that enabled survival in -40-degree Arctic conditions now power our computers. The same cooperation that made mammoth hunting possible now coordinates international space missions. The same determination that drove ocean crossings to unknown lands now fuels our efforts to understand the universe itself. The questions we posed at the beginning have found their answers in the most remarkable survival story ever documented. What drove our ancestors to leave their African homeland? The combination of climate opportunity and the uniquely human refusal to accept limits. How did a tropical species survive in Arctic wastelands? Through innovations in clothing, shelter, and social cooperation that wouldn't be significantly improved upon for thousands of years. How did they cross vast oceans without instruments or maps? By developing navigation techniques so sophisticated that modern science is still working to fully understand them. But the deeper answer lies in something that can't be measured by archaeology or genetics: the indomitable human spirit that sees challenges not as barriers, but as opportunities for innovation. Our ancestors didn't set out to become the dominant species on Earth. They were simply trying to survive one more day, feed their families, and find safety in an uncertain world. Yet their accumulated innovations, passed down through generations, created capabilities that no other species has ever possessed. Today, as we face challenges that seem as impossible as Arctic survival must have seemed to tropical primates' climate change, resource depletion, space colonization, we carry within us the genetic and cultural legacy of the ultimate survivors. The same problem-solving abilities that turned Ice Age Siberia into a thriving homeland can address global warming. The same cooperative instincts that enabled desert crossings can coordinate international environmental action. The same innovative capacity that invented ocean-going vessels can develop technologies we haven't yet imagined. The story of humanity's conquest of ice, deserts, and oceans isn't ancient history. It's the foundation of our future. Every time we refuse to accept that a problem is unsolvable, every time we cooperate to overcome challenges that individuals couldn't handle alone, every time we innovate our way around seemingly impossible obstacles, we are living up to the legacy of those first pioneers who looked at the impossible and decided to make it possible. The greatest lesson from our ancestors isn't that they were superhuman, but that they were completely human, curious, determined, cooperative, and innovative in the face of challenges that should have destroyed them. These same human qualities, refined and amplified by 100,000 years of cultural evolution, represent our species' greatest assets for whatever impossible challenges await us in the centuries ahead. The conquest continues, from the depths of the ocean to the surface of Mars, and somewhere in our DNA, in our culture, and in our dreams, the echo of those first footprints leaving Africa reminds us that for humans, the impossible is just another word for the not yet achieved.